Hello, we are HKURBEX, which stands for Hong Kong Urban Exploration. Now, you're probably wondering what an urban exploration group from Hong Kong is doing in Singapore. Well, to talk about urban exploration. But what is that exactly? What is urban exploration? In the broadest context, it is the exploration of abandoned man-made buildings and structures. What we do is largely an anonymous endeavor because it's not exactly legal. And as such, we like to protect our identity. So my code name is Jenkins.
And I am Ghost. I'd like to thank you all for taking your Saturday off to be here and listen to us. We've made it a little bit easier for you. We're wearing masks, so you don't have to see our ugly faces. But there's another reason why we're wearing these masks. It's to take the focus away from us. This talk is not about him under the mask. It's not about me. It's not about our identities. It's about the places we visit and the places that we go to. What are these places? Well, they are sites of dereliction on the edge and the periphery of a society in cities around Asia. We've been to China, Singapore, Tokyo, Japan, Hong Kong mainly, of course. We call it Hong Kong Urbex. And we're fascinated by old heritage sites. Because a city, you know, the way it should be built is like an ecosystem. It needs to have a balance of the old and the new. Old heritage sites and new buildings and innovation as well. We found that, you know, public space, as you all know, we all pay tax, right? And our taxpayers' money, usually, it's bankrolled, right, to build sites and infrastructure that we don't actually have a say in. And we find this almost criminal, you know, because this money is also used to pull down old heritage sites with, like, hundreds of years of history. And that's wrong, you know? And this is why urban exploration is important, because we go to these sites and we document them.
Now, as Ghost has just said, over the past several years, members of our group have travelled extensively across the Asia-Pacific region and looked at a variety of locations like military bases, tunnels, and abandoned schools. Urban exploration serves different functions in different contexts, so of course there are different reasons why people do it, chief among them being exploration and curiosity. Now, I'd quickly like to mention that for us, we are not thrill seekers. It is not an exercise in vanity, it is an exercise in documentation. Having said that, for me personally, it is like a real-life video game. For me, it is escapism. And in a way, it's very surreal that I find myself in situations not too far removed than some of the video games I played as a kid. And throughout our journeys and travels, we've gained a deeper understanding of the nature of urban decay.
Yes, as he said, we're documentarians. He's a gamer. We have all kinds of labels to describe us. Historiographers, ethnographers, geographers, whatever you want to call us. We are urban explorers. And we do this to reclaim and reappropriate the spaces in the city around us. Now, what brings all these places together? What ties all these abandoned places? Why is there so many? Well, it's all about growth and development. Like a butterfly coming out from a cocoon, cities do need to progress, they do need to transform, and they do need to advance. But they need to do that in a respectful manner. That's what we find. They need to do it with a discourse with the community and a discussion with the community. Some examples of places that have not been so respectful in their development include Vietnam and Indonesia and China. The Vietnamese were colonized by the French, as you guys hopefully know. Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch, and their colonization was very violent. So they associated that with negativity, and they pulled down some gorgeous architectural heritage sites, and they just pulled them down out of spite and built new low-rise buildings. China, of course, as you all know, destroyed decades. They wiped out history and heritage in the Cultural Revolution. And so, luckily, Hong Kong and Singapore, we have civil services and we have the rule of law. So they haven't been so violent in pulling down these sites. Nevertheless, we have started to see an upsetting trend that because Hong Kong and Singapore are so starved for land, they have started to attack these sites on the edge of society and pull them down, which is a real shame and it's disheartening to see.
Now, Hong Kong, for example, is a city of extremes. It has a population of around 7 million, or just over 7 million, packed into around 30% of the territory space. It is one of the most densely populated cities in the world, with one of the largest gaps between the rich and the poor. And because of this, we are seeing a housing crisis and apparent land shortage.
Yeah, but is this because of an actual lack of land? Actually, not really. I mean, in Hong Kong, this is the example I'm giving most. Hong Kong, as he just said, only 30% of land is developed in a city home to 7 million people. Now, let that sink in for a second. You know, that's like, wow, that's just huge, because it's like with the public housing, we have an issue, a public housing crisis. People need houses, but they can't find enough public housing and affordable public housing at that because they are selling out to property developers. I mean, if you were a government, and how would you find ways to house your public and the community who needed affordable housing? Well, you could look for sites in your possession, empty lands, empty schools. For example, Hong Kong has over 100 abandoned schools we've been into. 100. We're not talking small sites, we're talking big schools. Now, why can't they just repurpose these, revitalize them, and rejuvenate them to make way for maybe turn a school into an elderly home, or maybe turn a school into, knock it down and build a public housing affordable? But instead, what they're doing is they're acting like a business and colluding with property developers. And I don't blame them really, because they're earning billions of dollars, but at their public are at risk because of this. They are having to suffer. Sorry, that's what I'm trying to say. They're victims to this. They're having to suffer. Next slide, please. So usable land is so scarce in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is land hungry. So is Singapore in a way. And because the land is so high, they sell these sites off to property developers, and these monopolizing big real estate agents then build minuscule luxury housing developments, and they maximize the space in them. They're like not bigger than this stage, for example, and that's almost criminal. And then the people will buy these houses and then sell them off again for investment purposes. So is the public getting a house in return? Are they solving the public housing crisis? No, not really. They're just making a quick buck.
Now, in Hong Kong, we have the Antiquities and Monuments Office and the Urban Renewal Authority. Both of these bodies don't have the largest amount of power, but are still funded by the government anyway. In the past few years, we've lost quite a few different types of locations, such as barracks, historical mansions, and in particular, the White House, which was a prison used by the British in the Second World War. All of these locations have been removed to make way for schools and luxury houses, which again turn a profit for real estate developers. So, in essence, it means that on some level, Hong Kong is slowly losing its identity. Hong Kong is becoming less Hong Kong in the sense that the things that make it unique are relinquished to conglomerates who raise rent and remove heritage.
Yes, and now here is a small video to introduce some of our exploits in Singapore. Hope you enjoyed that. We put it together in like under an hour to prepare for this talk. But as you saw, we climbed, this was about a year ago when I went there, and we climbed like 100 meters underground. And that's pretty crazy, I mean, if you think about it. And why, what pushes me to do this? What's my motivation for this? Well, it's slightly the adrenaline rush, but for me, it's like I'm using all my senses when I go into these places. It's very dangerous, of course. I wouldn't recommend you guys to do it. Disclaimer. But basically, it's really not safe. And I enjoy that being out of control, because you're using your sight, your sense of smell, your hearing to see bats and stuff like that all around you. It's pitch black. We have to take our own lights and stuff like that. And it's scary because, like, you know, you can feel the force of history around you. These places are like living history. And Singapore has plenty of other sites like this, and some have been destroyed. These are some of the fatalities we've seen. We've had the Ellison building, which had a highway put through it, so half of it was demolished. And you're talking like hundreds of decades of history and heritage lost for a few minutes of convenience. That's pretty sad. Then we had the closure of the Shanghai 1930s flea market and the Roadshow Center, both which were like living hubs of community and heritage. And nevertheless, Singaporeans are starting to grow increasingly aware of heritage preservation. For example, in the Bukit Brown cemetery, some campaigners and protesters fought to get the number of graves demolished down from 5,000 to 3,700. And that's kind of a happy ending. They also cataloged all the graves, all 5,000 graves, before demolishing them. This sadly didn't happen in Orchard Road, which is built on the site of a former graveyard. And I think Singapore needs to learn from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. They turn their graveyards into heritage sites and parks that people can explore.
Now, funnily enough, something similar is happening in Hong Kong, where it is statistically more expensive to house the dead than it is to house the living. So essentially, you've got this situation where it's become like a lottery. So in some circumstances, the Hong Kong government has ordered that the remains of the dead be exhumed and cremated after a 6-year period to make way for newcomers. Failure to do so will result in the government undertaking exactly these actions, then placing said remains in a mass nameless communal grave.
Yeah, pretty sad. So he mentioned the Urban Renewal Authority. That's one authority in Hong Kong. Singapore also has the same body, Urban Renewal Authority, here, but they are slightly more powerful and slightly more strong, and they take extra steps to protect heritage. They've been working with the National Heritage Board and the Land Transport Authority to effectively save some sites. They've been quite successful in doing this.
Now, some of these happy stories include the Tanjong Pagar railway station with its preservation of the canopies, the National Gallery, which sits upon the old spot of the old Supreme Court, Lowan by Dempsey at Dempsey Hill, which was a former army barracks, now turned into a hip weekend destination. And as you saw on the video before with Serapong Fort here on Serioso Island, which has now been turned into a resort.
So some good stories, some happy endings. There are some similarities that tie these two economic rivals, Hong Kong and Singapore, together. They were both former jewels of the British Empire. They are both rife with densification. Hong Kong's probably more crowded than Singapore, but still. They are also both shaped by the grand forces of history.
Now, during the Second World War, both of these cities fell very quickly to the Japanese due to poor strategic planning and resources. After the war, however, the paths of the two cities diverged greatly, with Singapore campaigning for greater autonomy and receiving self-governance in 1957 before its establishment as a republic in 1965. As you know, Hong Kong remained under de facto British rule until 1997, and with the handover back to China, we're starting to see more changes as Hong Kong is being further assimilated into the mainland.
Yeah, it's not working out too well. Basically, gentrification is not necessarily a negative thing. This is what we're trying to say. This is the takeaway today. If it's done right and respectfully with a discussion with the community and all parties and groups are involved, it can be good. Basically, developers and the government need to take the lifestyle of diverse groups and cultures and different people and different classes into account when they truly build a vibrant neighborhood. And Singapore is starting to do this slowly. They're doing better. And Hong Kong needs to learn from them when they're having these discourses. Basically, it all needs to be done respectfully.
If there's one major thing you take away from the things that we've talked about today is that in some certain circumstances, there is value in trespass as it can lead to public discourse, especially with the exploration of these time capsules.
Yes, and I urge you to all explore your surroundings a little bit more. I'm not telling you exactly to trespass. I don't want to get done for aiding and abetting. I've got a camera here, as you can see, so don't do anything naughty. But do explore your surroundings a little bit more, because I would like to end with a question. Could you all please imagine and picture for me, if you will, something in your possession or something of high value to you, whether this be a piece of jewelry, necklace, a photograph, an old trinket from your grandfather, or even your finger. What if someone came along and cut off your finger? Not cool, right? What if someone came along without prior consent and took something that belonged to you? Not cool, right? Basically, this is what is happening in these societies, in places like Hong Kong and China and Singapore. And when they do that, they are disrupting the collective consciousness. The city is eroding in front of us because we need to do more to save these buildings of heritage. Granted, not every old building should be kept and preserved. I agree with that, and there needs to be some form of innovation and infrastructure development in cities as the populations grow, but a balance needs to be struck. So when you're exploring or walking around your neighborhood next time, I urge you to think about that old building over there, or think about that old car, and just think about how it came to be, and ask questions to yourself about it. Because if you do that, you'll learn more about your surroundings and your environments, and you'll learn more about yourselves in the process. We've been HKURBEX.
Thank you.
Thank you.